All right. So this is the second extra bonus video for our application. So congratulations for making it this far. We've effectively done everything we needed to do, and if you did the last video, then you even added some cool particle animation like this. In this video, what we're going to do is actually just focus more on some just JavaScript and some React front-end development together. So if you're interested in just honing on those skills a little bit more, thinking about building extensions, extended functionality, or just getting more familiar, running through some exercises on working with React, working with JavaScript and the coding language frameworks, then what we're going to do in this video or in the next following videos is we're going to build a timer effectively, and we're going to give it state and dynamics just like we were doing with our contracts. And this timer is going to be a airdrop timer. And what it's going to do is, you know how we wrote this airdrop down here, and we talked about adding this airdrop feature. So we're going to create a timer that just counts down as an insensitization for our customers, for our stakers, so that we can do it. Imagine if we had a website or we had a newsletter, and we can tell all of our customers, all of our investors, all right, anyone who invests or stakes over 50 tokens, let's say, we're going to say 50 tokens, there's going to be an airdrop that's going to occur, and they're going to receive an amount of rewards for doing that. Okay, so our airdrop effectively is going to have a timer that counts down after they make a stake. We're going to make the counter like 20 seconds just for the purposes so we can actually see it work. And then after that, we reward tokens because either we get a message, we'll get an alert, or we can figure out the functionality to do that. Now, I'm not going to do all of that. I'm not going to do all that. We're just going to work on essentially we're going to build out the functionality, think about the architecture, do some state, build it out, think about hooking it up to the smart contract. But I'm going to leave you to actually finishing this. This is a final bonus exercise for you to work on, to think about. But we are going to run through quite a bit together. So that's it. Okay, so that's it for an introduction on what we're going to be doing. Let's get to the more fun stuff, which is actually doing it, right? Okay, so remember, we need to have our Ganache open as always, and we need to have our contracts migrated up. We need to have our contracts migrated up and compiled to the proper Ganache instance. Okay, everything has to be connected on MetaMask, and of course, we also need to be running our localhost server, and we do that by npm run start. Okay, so make sure that everything's up, the localhost server's up, and you're good to go, and it's working. Okay, so now once we have everything set up, we can go into our text editor. Okay, and back in our text editor, let's just think for a second. All right, where do we want to put this airdrop? Where do we want to write this airdrop logic? Where do we want the functionality to go? And this is an important part of developing the applications is thinking about, well, where are we building our code? How are we building it out? Where do we put the logic, and where would we keep the logic in one file versus another? And what's the architecture as we continue to develop? So what I want you to do is to just think about, okay, I want you to look at the application, the main app, the navbar, particle settings, everything that we built so far, the contracts, the file folders. Take a look at everything, then pause the video and think about for yourself, well, where is the best place to write out the airdrop logic? So go ahead, give that a shot, and then I'll see you after that. All right, so hopefully you thought about that and you came up with some interesting ideas. Now I'm going to tell you what I think is the best move. And of course, this is, it's subjective, right? But as long as you have an efficient, scalable thought process for building that your components can be integrable and interoperable, then you're on the right path. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. So where would we actually want to put our airdrop feature? Well, we can put it in our main app, for example, right? Because in our main app, we have blockchain data, we have contract data. We know we're going to be hooking it up to some staking tokens featuring, because we need to make sure that it's staking the tokens. And we already have state, right? Because we know that we're going to create a timer. The timer is going to be dynamic. So we could be putting it adding to our constructor already. We set up the constructor. We have state for our contracts and our accounts. So maybe we could put it in this app. Well, I'm going to say actually, no, let's not do this here. And here's why. I mean, those reasons make sense. But the thing is that we have to remember that our app.js is effectively really just for loading the contracts, making sure the contracts are loaded, having our loading bar, and then rendering out all the final details. So our particles, our nav, and our main, right? Essentially, this is what our app is for. So if we start adding a timer on here and adding state for a timer, it could get confusing because now all of a sudden we're doing contract loading and we're creating this airdrop timer, and it doesn't really make sense, in my opinion, to do it here. All right, so where else could we think about doing it? Well, what about main.js, right? Well, in the main.js, if we scroll down, we know that we have our forms here, we have our buttons, and we even wrote our airdrop out over here, right? Like we wrote airdrop. So doesn't it make sense then to put our airdrop here since we wrote airdrop over here, right? Like if we go back here, we see airdrop. Well, I'm going to say no again, and here's why. Effectively, there's no state in this component. This is a stateless component that just renders out information that we're sending through props. So we send over the state props of the staking balance, and we have our forms and we can submit and our airdrop. And I just want to keep this main section like that. I don't want to start confusing this file by adding timer functionality and all this other type of functionality into this file. That's not something I want to do. So, but however, I can see us actually importing the airdrop into here. So just like how we import the main into the app, we can import the airdrop into here and then reflectively display it down here so that it will be displayed when we go into our app.js because it's going to carry the information over. Hopefully that makes sense. It's just a question of wiring it through. So where does that leave us then? We're not going to put it obviously in the nav bar. Well, you probably guessed it by now. The best move for us to do, in my opinion, is to create a new component called airdrop, write all the functionality of the state, keep it in the airdrop component, and then bring it into our main like that. Okay, so that's it for just going over what we're going to be doing, as well as the architecture as well as a synopsis on how we should build out the architecture for this code. So now that we've done that, in the next video, let's actually start writing out the shell and building out and initializing our state for our airdrop timer. Okay, very cool. I'll see you in the next video. All right, so we've decided to build out our own separate airdrop component and then just bring it into our main. So let's go to our components folder and create a new file. And we're going to call this file airdrop, essentially, right? .js. All right, so let's just hash out a little bit of React setup here. Pretty basic. So we've done this a few times, so hopefully you're getting the hang of this a little bit now. Import React. We're going to have a component. And we're going to bring this in from React. Okay. We don't need the semicolon. All right. And no, I don't need an idea, Mr. Lightbulb. All right. So we're importing React component. So then we're going to do class React. It's going to extend our component. Okay. And then we're going to render. If I can spell render today. And we're going to return something. Okay, and we're going to have a div in here for now. All right, and then we're going to export default airdrop. So we can export it and bring it in to our application effectively. Oops, extends component, not extend. I don't know why this render thing showed up. You don't want to write that. We don't need React DOM rendering. That's it. Okay, so this is our shell for our class React extends component. No. What's the mistake here? We're naming what we want our airdrop to be called. So it should be class airdrop extends component. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So now this is correct. We have the shell dished out. So what do we want to do next? Well, let's think about what it is exactly we want to do and write for this airdrop. So let's just hash this out together. So we want our airdrop to have a timer that counts down and returns. Sorry, we don't have a timer that counts down, but we only want to initialize this countdown after our customers have staked a certain amount. So 50 tokens, right? So what are we going to need to do that? Well, the timer is going to have to have a timer functionality. So we're going to have timer functionality. We're going to have a countdown. We're going to have a start timer functional, right? We're going to be able to start the timer. We're going to have state for time to work, right? Because time's going to change. The seconds are going to change. We need to keep track of the time. And we're going to have to hook it up to the blockchain, right? So that's essentially everything that we're going to need to do in order for this to work, right? Because we're going to have to hook it up to our staking tokens, because we're going to have to check that when we've staked tokens, that's when the timer should go off, when we've staked a certain amount. So that's it essentially in terms of what we want to do. So let's go ahead and start doing it. So what would be the first thing that we want to do here? Well, let's actually write a constructor, right? Because our constructor essentially is where we can hold our state. We can instantiate a new object for our state, and we can create methods that can effectively render the dynamics that we need to have. So we do that by creating a constructor like this, like we did last time. And the constructor is going to take a super. And essentially what the super is, or what the super does, it's for the subclasses, because the constructor, it doesn't belong to any objects here. We're creating a new object effectively when we're working with this constructor. So for our subclasses, we need to call the super. And if that's confusing, for now, the biggest takeaway here is that if you need to have the super here in your constructor. You just got to call the super with your constructor. And the more you use it, the more you're going to get used to it. And you can check out the resources that I added in this course on JavaScript and React for constructors. So constructors, if you want to get a deeper understanding on that. But for now, we're going to do that. And now let's initialize some state. So let's do this.state. And what do we want our state to be? Or what do we want to initialize state to be? So we want to have a timer, right? And the timer is going to be an object. Actually, you know what? Let's call this time, because we're going to have timer is going to be separate. Timer is going to be for timing things. So we're going to have time, which is going to be an object, right? Our time is going to be an object. And we also want to have a countdown that we can display. And we're going to do that in seconds, because I don't want us to wait hours or days. Now, if this is a real application, obviously, maybe you don't want the airdrop to happen seconds after they do it. Maybe you do. I don't know. That's up to you. But we're going to just to see this working, we're going to do seconds, and we're going to do with a value of 20. So 20 seconds. Okay. So that's it for our state. But let's go ahead and also add some more functionality here. So what else should we have? Well, we said time. So we're going to also want a timer. So why don't we set up a timer? So we can say this.timer. And our timer is going to be 0, right? We're going to just initialize it at 0. Now, what else do we want to add? Well, we want to have a start time, right? So when we start the time, and we want to have a countdown. Those are two other pieces of functionality that are going to make sense to have for our timer. So we're going to say this.start time. And what we need to do is, since we're going to make this into a method that we can use from our constructor, we're going to have to actually bind. So we're going to do bind.this. And again, this is something that you just have to do, just like calling super to this. And whoa. Sorry, I just made a mistake here. It needs to be this.starttime.bind. We are binding this, essentially. So we're taking the this keyword and we're binding it so that we can actually call this. And we're binding to this so that we can actually set this to be bound. That way we'll be able to find it. So what this does is we're just binding the start time. Now, if this is a bit confusing, again, you can read up more on the constructor. I'm going to provide the resources. But for now, this is something that you get used to doing unless you're working with hooks in React. It's a syntax that you really do get used to. So let's do a countdown as well. Okay, so the start time is bound by this. We have a timer at 0. Countdown also is binded. And we have set our state to an object, set our state. And in our state, we have our seconds, which will be counting down, and the time, right? In general, we're going to have the time as an object. Okay, that's it for setting up our shell for our airdrop and initializing our state and getting our constructor going. In the next video, let's build out some functionality so that we can get this timer to be working. So we're going to be doing some basic math. It's going to be interesting, right? Because we have to create the timer. So we're going to have fun with a little bit of math. And don't worry, we'll be using calculators. We're using a calculator for that. And some JavaScript methods to round everything because we can actually have fractions. So that's it. That's it for now, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, bye. All right, so we have our constructor set up. We have created our airdrop component, and now we need functionality, right? So what we need to do is we have to think about a timer, and a timer is not going to run on like 1,000 seconds per minute, hour. It needs to be converted, right? Like an hour is going to be 1 through 9, right? So it's based off of a clock system. So our minutes are going to be divided into 60, right? Our seconds are going to be divided into 60 as well. So we have to be thinking about it in terms of hours, seconds, and minutes. So what we want to do is create a function that can actually convert for us with JavaScript, remove the fractions, and create a clock system where we can have this timer set up so that our initialization, whatever we put in the state to say, well, we want it to start at 20 seconds or 30 seconds, 100 seconds, a million seconds, whatever that is, will convert into our clock parameters, right? Because we don't want to be doing these calculations every single time. That would be really annoying. So what we want to do is create a function, and we're going to call it set seconds. Actually, sorry, we're going to call it, just call it seconds to time. And what is this function going to take as an argument? Well, we want to take the argument to be the seconds. So we'll just call it secs. And like just secs is fine, just to keep it separate, but it's the same idea. And all right, so what variables do we want to add in here? Well, we're talking about hours, we're talking about minutes, and we're talking about seconds. So why don't we create 3 variables? So let's say let hours, seconds, minutes. All right, cool. And so now we have these. So let's create conversions. So let's create the mathematic conversions so that we can convert, let's say, 2,000 or 20,000 seconds for the hours. How many hours should 20,000 seconds equal, right? So how do we even convert this? What should be the calculation? Let's say you had 20,000 seconds. Is this 20,000? Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 20,000. Wait, no. 20, 200, 2,000, 20,000, 200,000. Sorry, that's 200,000. Fine. There, 20,000. So we want to calculate 20,000 seconds equals how many hours? So how do you even do this calculation? Well, we take out the calculator because it's easier that way, right? Even though, do we really need the calculator? Yeah, we're going to use the calculator because this isn't a math class, but I could actually just do this mathematically. Anyway, so what we want to do is, it's a very basic calculation here. We have 20,000 seconds, and we want to divide 20,000 by what? Well, by 3,600, right? And if we make that division, we get 5.5 hours, or 5.555556 hours. Now, why do we do it by 3,600? Well, because we know that how many seconds are in a minute? Well, there's 60 seconds in a minute, right? And how many minutes are in an hour? Well, there's 60 minutes in an hour, right? So 60 times 60 is 360. What does that give us? Well, 3,600 is how many seconds there are, total amount of seconds multiplied by the total amount of minutes that we want to create for our clock system. That's how we get the 3,600. So this is our total in seconds. So everything that we divide in our seconds by this is going to actually issue out what it should be. Hey, I didn't make the clock system. This is just how it is. Okay, so knowing this calculation, let's go ahead and try to write this out mathematically. Let's try to write this out in JavaScript. So how would we do that? Well, we want to do the hours first, right? So what we do is we can set our hours. So we can say hours equals, and then just write out the calculation. So what we can say is we can say, well, we want the argument, so it's going to be sex, right? And we're going to want to divide sex by what? Well, we can just write 60 times 60. Okay, and this would be great. This would actually work perfectly if it wasn't for one very important thing. And what is that? And what is that one thing? Well, it's that if we do 20,000 seconds and we divide it by 3,600, we get this 5.555. We can't have that. So what we need to do is actually leverage a method. We can use a JavaScript rounding method. There's a couple different ones. And what we're going to use here is the floor. So to do that, what we can do is we can say hours equals math.floor. And we can wrap the calculation in our floor like this. So floor is going to round. So floor is effectively going to round our hours down. Okay, so it's just going to always round it down. So it returns the largest integer, essentially less than or equal to a given number. All right, and so that's the calculation for our hours. Great. Oh, you know what? Let me just switch this up. Let's do hours, minutes. It's going to look better. Seconds. So let's do our minutes next, and it's going to be a little bit more. Slightly more complicated. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a divisor for our minutes, right? And we're just going to say let divisor, I don't know how you spell divisor. Divisor for minutes. And, well, we're going to put in our secs, so the argument of however many seconds it is. And then we're going to use the modulo operator, so the remainder operator here. And we're going to run this calculation again. Now, what is the remainder operator in JavaScript? Well, essentially, the remainder operator it returns the remainder left over when one operand is divided by a second operand. And it always takes the sign of the dividend. So what does that mean? Well, essentially, okay, so if you have 12 and you want to find the remainder, and you want to find the remainder 5, well, 5 goes into 12 how many times? It goes into 12 2 times. So the expected output is going to be 2, right? Or minus 12. 5 goes into minus 12 how many times? It would be minus 2, right? How many times does 2 go into 4? 0 times. How many times does 2 go into negative 4? Minus 0. Okay, that's essentially what the remainder is going to do. It's going to find the remainder of our quotients. So why is this important for calculating for our clock? Well, so again, so if we have, let's say, 20 seconds, all right, and we have 3,600, again, for our calculation for total seconds to minutes. So if we divide 3,600 by 20 seconds, we get 180, okay? And we still can't use 180 for our minutes, but if we take 180 and we divide this number by 60, we actually get 3 minutes. And the 3 minutes is essentially going to be the remainder for finding our minutes in 20,000 seconds. So let's go through that calculation one more time. Let's say we have 500 seconds. And so we want to do, how many times does 3,600 go into 500 seconds? So 7.2. So we get this 7.2 as our divisor for our minutes. And now when we take our 7.2 and we divide it into 60, we see that we have 0.12 minutes. And so that's just going to be 0, right? Because we're going to be rounding this. But that's essentially the calculation to find our minutes. Now, if that's a little bit confusing, no worries. We're going to write it out. We're going to write it out together now. So let's take a look and see this in action. So now that we have our divisor for minutes, what we can do is we can say minutes is going to equal our divisor for minutes, okay, divided by 60. But are we done here? Well, we're not done, right? Because we can't have fractions. If we have fractions, it's not going to work in JavaScript. So what do? Well, we're going to use the math.floor again. We're going to round. So we're going to be rounding. And there you go. That's how we get the minutes. So I want you to now pause the video and write out the code for the seconds. So go ahead, pause the video, and give that a shot. All right, so hopefully you had some success figuring out the seconds. The seconds actually would be very similar to the minutes, right? Since we're using this same type of calculation. It's just going to be slightly different because instead of creating our divisor for minutes to be the seconds, the remainder of seconds to the overall total seconds of our clock system, what we're going to do is actually we're actually going to set a divisor for seconds. We would take a divisor for seconds and set it to the divisor of minutes with a remainder of 60, So it would actually look something like this, right? We would say let divisor for seconds, and let's paste that there. So let the divisor for seconds equal what? Well, we only need 60 seconds, right? We don't need, to get minutes, we had to do 60 to 60, but since this is seconds, we only need 60. And instead of seconds, we should put the divisor for minutes to be the remainder of 60 here. And then now we would switch minutes to seconds, and we don't have to do any other division over here. The only thing and that's it. The only thing I would say to change is to use math.ceiling, and let's round up instead of rounding down for our seconds. So we'll be rounding it upwards. Okay, awesome. So now we have our hours, we've got our minutes, and we've got our seconds. But let's actually set these calculations into an object of properties in our function so that we can just return this object, and whenever we want to access the properties here, we can set it up to H, S, and M. Okay, so let's actually make an object. So we can just say let object equal object, and go ahead and try to do this yourself. Pause the video and set up your hours, minutes, and seconds to the properties, to the variables that we created as properties, hours, minutes, and seconds. So give that a shot. Okay, so hopefully you had some success with that. In order to do that, we're going to create 3 strings, and then we're going to be able to access these later on. So we're going to say H is going to be hours. We're going to say M is going to be minutes. And S is going to be seconds. Okay? And then when we're done, what's the final thing we want to do here in our function? Well, the final thing we want to do is actually return our object. So we just return the object. So this is our function to effectively convert our hours, minutes, and seconds, and then set up our state. So our time is going to receive our state of our hours and minutes and seconds. And we're going to do that together later on, so I'll show you how to do that. But for now, this has just been really a lesson in some JavaScript methods, setting up variables, writing an object, and then coming up with calculations based on a system, on a clock system. Now, if the whole remainder and calculations for divisor for minutes is confusing, don't worry, it's still confusing. Don't worry about it. It's a calculation. This type of calculation exists all over the internet. So it's the kind of thing that if you're really not sure about it, there's tons of modulo remainder calculators available. You could go on Khan Academy and learn about remainders if you need to brush up on your math, or brush up on your on your math and your probability and clocks, that kind of stuff. So I'd encourage you to do that. But the real takeaway here is that we understand we're creating a function here which is going to be running our conversions to set up our clock, and then has the properties for our hours, minutes, and seconds, which we could then utilize for the airdrop timer. Okay, in the next video, we're going to continue to build out our airdrop timer. I'll see you there. Great work, great work, great work. See you in the next one. All right, so now that we have initialized our state with a time as an object, and we have a function that actually creates the logic to convert our time and sets up our our object here of hours, minutes, and seconds, where we can actually instantiate our state and set it up to our object and our time here. Let's actually connect these together in a life cycle in our component did mount so that it can render on the page and we can see it. So to do that, we're going to work with the lifecycle component did mount. Now in our app.js, if you remember, we worked with component will mount. And component will mount essentially calls immediately before the mounting occurs, whereas component did mount is going to be called immediately after a component is mounted. So let's see how this would work with the timer and why we're going to use the component did mount lifecycle. Well, it's not going to be asynchronous, right? So we don't have to worry about getting anything else to render first and foremost. We can use component did mount because we can wait to see that everything else is loaded successfully and then bring in our timer and then instantiate our timer. We don't have to wait for all the contracts to load in order to do this. So what we're going to say is component did mount, and we're going to create a time left variable. So we're going to say time left variable. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring in our seconds to time. So we're going to say this dot seconds to time is going to be this dot state dot seconds. And so now we're instantiating seconds to time. We're getting our function and we're bringing it into our time left variable. So now what we're doing is we're bringing in our seconds to time and we're setting it to the state of the seconds, which is the 20 seconds here, into this variable time left var. And now we're going to load this into our timer effectively. And we do that by setting state. So we can say this dot set state, okay? And what's the state that we want to set? Well, it's time. And what do we want time to be? Well, we want to set time to time left variable. So now that we've actually set our seconds to time to the state, we should actually have access to these properties that we built in our object here, our hours, our minutes, and seconds. And we should see this access come through if we want to render this state out. So let's give this a shot together and see if it actually works. So we're going to try rendering out our hours, minutes, and seconds and see if we actually get any, so we're going to change the style in our div and we're going to go color black. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're just going to bring in this dot state dot time and what do we want from time? Well, we're going to grab the minutes. So how do we do that? Well, we just grab the property in time. So we say time.m and we want the seconds. So we're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to add a colon, so we can see it like minutes, seconds, and I'm going to change this to seconds. Okay. Now I'm going to save this. And now let's go to our local host and see if we see anything. So we hit refresh, put it up. We see there's a pause, withdraw, airdrop, but we're not seeing the time displaying. Our state is not actually being displayed. So why is that? Why do you think the state actually isn't being displayed? Well, because we wrote this entire code in our airdrop component, right? But we've never actually brought our airdrop component into our app. We've never actually brought it in to be displayed here, right? So we have all the code set up, but it's not displaying anything because it's not actually wired into our DApp application just yet, right? So how do we actually wire it up? Well, as we said, in order to wire this up, we're going to we want to bring it into our main, essentially bring our airdrop component to be displayed in our main component because this is where we have our airdrop. It's in the form. So in order to do this, all we have to do is just import airdrop from airdrop. Okay. And then we're going to scroll down to where our airdrop is. And right next to airdrop here, let's just bring an airdrop like this. So let's bring it in. Okay, so let's save this And let's reload, see what happens. Okay, and I'm getting a start time being undefined. Okay, and we get an error that start time is undefined. And that's actually because we haven't defined start time yet. We've created our bindings for it for bringing it into the constructor, but we never actually, but we still haven't wrote that functionality out. So that's my bad. So what we're going to, and we're just going to code these out for now. So start time, comment them out. The start time and the countdown, because we haven't wrote this out yet, but we want to make sure that it's displaying first. So it's not a big deal. We just comment it out, save. Let's go back to our local host and refresh. And all right, so we are now seeing effectively our airdrop coming through. So we don't see the time yet. We don't see the 0 or the 20 seconds. And we're going to look at why in a second, but at least for now, we are seeing this colon. And where does this colon come from? Well, it actually comes from our airdrop, right? Because we wrote the colon over here between our state.time and our minutes and our seconds, right? So we are actually importing successfully and there's no errors, which is excellent. So in the next video, we're going to take a look and see how come our minutes and our seconds aren't displaying correctly, even though we do got the colon. So we're almost there on getting our state to display. Let's figure out how to do that in the next video, and then actually build out our start timing functionality and our countdown functionality so that we can bind it to the constructor. Clock is ticking, everybody, pun intended. I'll see you in the next video. All right, so we have our constructor set up. We commented out our start time and our countdown because we haven't actually wrote that functionality. So that was causing a glitch in loading our application over here. So now it's loading and we can see airdrop. We see the colon that we created, but we're not seeing our timer come up yet, which we should be, right? Because we declare the state in our return. So we say this.state.time and we grab the minutes and the seconds. And we do this, where do we actually set up the state? Well, we initialize the state with our time here. Then in our seconds to time, we create the properties for our minutes and our seconds over here. But then when we actually mount our seconds to time function and we call it, but it's actually where our component did mount, where we are rendering this, where we're actually getting our seconds to time function to where we're actually calling our seconds to time function, and we're setting it to the argument of the seconds. So it should be displaying 20 seconds, but instead we're getting nothing. All right. We don't like nothing, we like something. So why is this happening? Well, there's an error here. I just spotted it. It's a syntax error. If you haven't spotted the error, you can go ahead, pause the video, and try to fix it now. Okay, so did you fix it? Or maybe you had already fixed it previously. If not, don't worry, let's just fix it now. So when we set state, we're not actually setting state to equal anything, right? We're actually inputting the argument of what the object is that we want to be updating. So this shouldn't be equal to set state. It's a syntax error. It should actually be setting state like this. So we change the state, then we access time in our state, right? We have time over here, and then we set what time is, and time should be time left var. This is how we actually set state. I don't know what I was thinking. Oh my gosh, but looks like this is fixed. So if you figured that out and you fixed it, excellent. If not, let's just refresh the page now and see what happens. Oh, there it is. Let's refresh it again. Oh, okay, awesome. So we see that it's already updated. So airdrop 20 seconds. Amazing. Okay, so now we actually have our state updated. We've put our state in. Our component is actually hooked up into our main, which is over here, right? We send the component out over here. Then that goes into our app. The main goes into our app. And then that gets rendered onto our React DOM, rendered with the React DOM over here. See, the app comes out over there, and then it goes all the way onto our local server over here, right? That's the sequence of events. Perfect. So now that our timer is up, our state is not only initialized, but it's displaying correctly what it should. And we can actually test this. If I change the seconds up here in our constructor from 20 to 30, and I save and go back, this should change to 30 seconds. So let's see the refresh. Okay, awesome. So it should be changing when you change what you initialize it to. But now that we have it, I'm going to put it back to 20 seconds. Let's actually write out our start time and our countdown. And actually, this is actually going to be a start timer. So I'm just going to change this to timer. And we're going to change this to timer. Okay, so let's go ahead and comment these back in. Let's actually build out first the start timer. So I'm just going to comment back in the start timer. Actually, you know what? Let's do the countdown first. My bad. Yeah, we're going to do the countdown first because then we can see if the countdown works, and then we'll do the start timer afterwards. It just makes more sense for the progression of events for us to build it out this way. We'll be able to test it better one step at a time. So let's just do this countdown first. So let's build out a countdown function, then see if the countdown works, if we could actually count it down with a set interval, and with a set interval method, which is a JavaScript method. And then after that, we'll do the start timer. So let's take a look at that in the next video. Okay, so let's work on our countdown. So in order to build out our countdown for our timer and our airdrop, because we want these seconds to change from 20, 19, 18, right? We could just build a function that's actually going to count this down for us, and then we can call that function to count it down. And how we choose to call the function is going to be up to us, right? But for now, we'll just build out the functionality of it. So what do we want to do first? Well, the first thing we want to do, I'll let you guess. What do you think the first thing is? Probably to make the countdown function, right? So let's just make a function, countdown. We can just make it like this. All right, so we've got a countdown function here. And what should we put as the logic in our countdown function? Well, we should do two things, right? We should do one thing where what we're going to do is just count down. So count down 1 second at a time. That's one. All right. And then two, we want to stop counting when we hit 0, right? So those are the two things that we want to do. So let's focus on one of these things at a time. So count down 1 second at a time. Well, how can we actually write this out? Well, essentially what we want to do is just say -1 every time, right? Seconds are going to be 20, 19, 18. So we want to subtract 1 from here every single time. So how could we do that and write it out in our countdown function and set it up to our state so it does it? Well, we can make a variable. We can call it seconds. And let's just say in our seconds variable, we're going to put this math there. So we can say this.state.seconds -1. And now that we have a seconds that's actually changing, we can go ahead and update the state so that it's going to be -1 every time this function runs. So how do we do that? It can be -1 when we're running this function. So how do we do that? Well, what we do is we can go here. Let's go underneath and let's set the state. So we can say this.setState. And this time I'm going to set the state properly, not like a fool. And what is the state that we want to set? Well, it's our time and our seconds, right? So time and seconds. Let's set our seconds to our seconds. So we'll do that. And then what about time? What should time be? Well, time should be the update of our seconds, right? But how do we do that? Well, we want to run our seconds to time function in order to do that. So what we can do is we can say this.seconds to time. And as an argument, we're actually going to take seconds so that we're subtracting our seconds. And we'll run a comment over here. Okay, and so now we have a countdown formula here. So we're basically grabbing the state at 20 seconds, we -1, and then we reset the state here. So we set the state so that seconds to time, whenever we run the countdown, is going to do the same thing. We set the state to our seconds to time, but this time our seconds are actually going to be subtracted by one. Okay, and then our seconds here, and then we update our seconds, right? Because then we want it to be 19 the next time, and 18 and 17. Otherwise, if we don't do that, it'll just go back to 20 every single time, right? Because if we remove that, it's not going to update our seconds. So we need to update our seconds as well. And that's the logic essentially for our countdown, for counting down. But the other thing we want to do is we want to clear our interval when we get to 0. So how do we do that? Well, let's work on that together now. And how do we do this? Well, we want to write a conditional statement, right? And what do we want to say? Well, let's work with our seconds. We want to say that when our seconds get to 0, we clear the timer. So how do we write that out? So you know what? Pause the video and give it a shot. See if you can take what I just said and write it out in JavaScript. Good practice. Good luck. Okay, so hopefully you had success giving that a shot. If not, don't worry, we'll do it together. If you did, way to go. You the man or the woman or the whatever. Okay, so we're going to do if seconds equals what? 0, right? So that's our statement. If seconds equals 0 is true, then what do we want to do? Well, we can actually use a method, and maybe you know this method, maybe not. We're going to use the clear interval method. And essentially, clear interval comes from JavaScript. And what it does is cancel the clock. It's just going to stop. It's going to essentially just stop our interval, because we're going to use another function called set interval in order to run this countdown, which actually starts the countdown, and clear interval stops it. So in order for you to have got this, you would have had to know either already known clear interval or looked up some JavaScript methods. Now, is this the only way to do it? No, you could have actually written out some code to run a script and count it down in a different way. You could have written some code to stop it in another way, to cancel it, and that's totally fine too. But this is the way we're going to do it. This is easy. It's set up. This is efficient and easy to do. So we're just going to run clear interval, and what's the argument that we're going to be clearing? Well, it's going to be the timer, but we have to put in the this, right? Because we have to we are grabbing our this.timer, right? So we're bringing in this.timer like that. And now we have a countdown function. That's it. So let me just save this and let's make sure nothing's breaking. Okay, looks like we refreshed. Everything's good to go. All right, awesome. So we've built out the countdown functionality in this two-step process. In the next video, let's go ahead and actually call the countdown with a set interval and make this timer work together. All right, great work. See you in the next video. Okay, so we're almost there. We're almost getting our timer to work and our countdown to work. We set up our state. We have our countdown function. So now we want it to actually count down. So let's comment back in our start timer. And let's actually create a function for this as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write start timer, and we're going to create a conditional statement in here as well. We're going to say that we're only going to start this timer if our timer is equal to 0. So if our timer is equal to 0, then we can say this.timer. Oh, and remember, it's not going to know which timer, so we're going to say this.timer. So if this timer is equal to 0, then what we want to do is this.timer is going to equal what? Well, we have a clear interval over here in order to cancel a countdown. So how would we start it? Well, we do that with another method called set interval. So we can do set interval. And then set interval takes 2 arguments. And the first argument is what you want to be setting as your interval. So what number would you want to set as an interval? So for us, it's going to be the countdown, right? So we're going to say this.countdown. And then the second argument is actually the intervals, the speed of which we want to be counting down. So we're going to take 1,000. And 1,000 is going to take us down 1 second at a time. And I'm going to show you how that works. So for now, let's start with this. And the only thing left we'd have to do to get this to work, because right now it's not going to work, right? Because right now it's not going to move, right? Why is that? Because we're not actually calling our start timer. So we want to actually call our function. So let's go ahead and call it in our render over here. We can just say, add some JavaScript, and we can say this.start timer. And call it like that. Let's save and see what happens. Airdrop, and look at that. We are now counting down. Boom, we did it. We built a timer that's working on seconds, minutes, and hours. And it should hopefully stop when it hits 0. Let's see what happens. Okay, great. And it stopped. Beautiful. So we don't want to actually call the function here. But before I actually show you that, and wait, we can reinforce the functionality here. I'm just going to add this as well. I'm going to say if this dot timer equals 0 and this dot state dot seconds. And over here, you know what's interesting? You try and write this out. I think I want to add another argument to this condition. I want to add another condition to the if statement here. And I want to say that if the timer equals 0 and our seconds has to be greater than 0, right? Because we don't want our seconds to ever count down if it's anything greater than 0. So we're just going to reinforce this conditional statement. So pause the video here and try to actually write that out. Try and write out this statement as well, and that the seconds has to be greater than 0. All right, hopefully you had some success giving that a shot. So to do that, with an if statement, if you want to do and, you can do the double and operand, and that's just going to add additional logic. So we could say this timer equals 0, and now we can just say this dot state dot seconds needs to be greater. Okay, perfect. So let's just save that and make sure it's working. Sweet. Okay, so we're still looking good. All right, so how do we get it to so finally, how do we get this airdrop timer to work only if we see that our customers are staking more than 50. Right now we're not staking anything. The investor has no stake, so they do not deserve an airdrop. They're only going to get this airdrop if this thing happens, right? So how can we actually write that logic out? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to get rid of calling this function out in our render here, because otherwise that's just going to continue calling it and it's going to continue to count down. So we got rid of that. So what's the next thing that we should think about writing? Well, what we want to write is essentially a function that's going to check to see if there has been a deposit of 50 or more USDT tethers, and if there has, then you produce an airdrop. Right? That's the functionality that we want to be creating together here. So how do we do that? Well, it always starts by trying to write out the function. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to need to grab contract information. And which contract information do we want specifically from our app.js? Well, we're going to want to just get the staking balance, right? If we work with the staking balance here, we can grab the staking balance, see what it is, grab it from the accounts, from the contracts, from where the transactions are happening, and then update our state that way. Okay, awesome. So how would we do that? So how would we do that? Well, let's go back into our airdrop and let's write a function that's going to run based on those conditions. So what we're going to do, and let's put it at the bottom here after we mount. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function, and we're going to call it stake rewards. Okay, let's call it just stake RWD. No, stake reward, like that. I don't want to get confused with the reward tokens. So wait, let's think of a better name. What about airdrop release tokens? Okay. Yeah, airdrop release tokens. We can call it that. It's not actually going to release the tokens for what we're going to build, but I'm going to let you take that to the next level if you want to as the final bonus. But it is going to release tokens in the sense that it's going to be counting down to 0, and when it hits 0, it should release the token. When it hits 0, we can execute the script to release the tokens. It's not a big leap to figure out how to do that, but I'm going to let you do the final coding for that. So let's just make the function airdrop release tokens. And what are we going to do? Well, we're going to create a variable called staking B. And we're going to set this to this.props.staking balance, right? We're going to grab the properties of the staking balance from our app.js because we already wrote it out over here. We've already set staking balance to the staking balance as as a property, passing on the state, passing over the state, right? So that's pretty awesome. We already have that. So we can just reinstantiate that over here. And that's the beauty of React. And now that we've set it up like that, all we have to do is write our statement. So we can say if staking B is what? Is greater than or equal to how much? Well, 50. But then remember, this is 50 and we're going to need, this is 50 and we're going to have to convert this for our 18 decibels. So we're going to have to add the 18 decibels, right? So 50, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, right? So that's going to be the equivalent of our 50 tokens, 50 tokens when we convert it to ETH from our way, right? And we're following the same pattern as Ethereum. And if this is still confusing, please go back to our smart contracts when we built out our smart contract videos, where I go into details in explaining these conversions. Okay, so if staking B is greater than that, then what do we want to do? I'll let you have the final stroke here. Did you guess it? I hope you did. It's this dot start timer. And that's it. So let's save that. Let's save that and let's go back to our app. Make sure there's no errors here. So far, so good. We have our timer. So let's just give this a whirl. Let's put in 50. Let's give in 50 tokens and see what happens. So I put in 50 tokens. We're going to deposit. Our Firefox gets powered on. So far, so good. We're going to confirm the transaction. We're going to confirm the second transaction. We're going to, okay, looks like it went through. And now let's refresh. It takes a little bit of time to process, right? It's coming from the blockchain. It's all asynchronous, yada, yada, yada. And okay, 50 tokens, but our airdrop isn't changing. And you know what? Can you guess why this isn't working? What did we do wrong here? What do you think happened? Well, we set our properties to staking balance, but is airdrop actually ever receiving any properties? Well, let's go into our main component. Remember, our main component is receiving all the properties, but our airdrop is in our main component. And just because our airdrop is in our main component doesn't mean that it's going to receive all the properties that our main component receives. It doesn't work that way. For something like this, if we know our properties are being passed down from our app to our main, we can then pass it down from our main into our airdrop. And so what are we going to do? We're just going to write the properties in here. So I'm going to say staking balance equals what? Well, the same thing, right? It's going to be the props though, not the state this time. So I'm going to say this dot props dot staking balance. I'm going to save this. And now if we refresh the page, drum roll please. Da, 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 da. 50 tokens, airdrop. Nothing. Oh man, I was hoping this was going to work. Okay, so let's figure out what happened. Okay, so did you guess why it's not working? It just hit me when I came back here to the airdrop section. We did not actually call airdrop release tokens. We're never actually calling it. So if we want to do that, we got to go into our render and we're going to say this dot airdrop release tokens. So let's save that. Let's go back, cross our fingers, and refresh. And hopefully this time will be the magic time. So we've got 50 tokens up there. Airdrop. Boom. Airdrop initiated. Amazing. It is working. We are now talking to the blockchain. We've got the timer for the drop that gets executed based on the staking. And to further demonstrate that this works, if I withdraw, so we're going to withdraw all our tokens, confirm that we're going to withdraw, and then, oh, sorry. And so it still hasn't actually processed the withdrawal. That's why it's dropping. But if I reload, it's no longer dropping once the balance is back to 0. And that's it. So we got everything to be working. So here's your bonus exercise. If you want to take this to the next level, take everything that you've learned in this course and go to the scripts where we issue the tokens. And you see here that when we want to issue tokens, essentially we grab the decentral bank contract, we wait for the tokens, and then we just execute the issue tokens and figure out for yourself how to issue the tokens after the timer hits 0. So when the timer drops to 0, we want to issue the tokens. So go ahead, that's your final, there you go, that's your final exercise for this application. Congratulations for doing the bonus exercises. You're an extra warrior coding ninja. You get extra star points in my book. Great work coming this far. It's been really fun going through this. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.